Hello, my dear viewers. I wish you pleasant viewing and a wonderful day. I also look forward to your feedback in the comments. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and bitter coffee, the two scents that defined this new era of my life. I sat perfectly upright, legs crossed at the ankles, clutching a folder so tightly my fingers had left indents in the cardstock. It was my 75th interview. Yes, I was counting. There's something degrading about job hunting after you've been fired. Not because you're incompetent, but because someone with more clout decided you were disposable. And once word gets out that you're a liability, even if you have the results to disprove it, doors start closing before you even knock. I used to be someone in this industry, a name whispered in boardrooms. Indira Moraine, the one who turned Hyperwave's quarterly collapse into a brand resurgence. Indy, the strategist who got Luvian Pharma into the Asian market without touching a single billboard? I had international campaigns under my belt, fluency in 3 languages, and a portfolio so airtight you could vacuum seal produce with it. But ever since that fallout with my last company, I was the woman with the red-flagged file, the corporate version of radioactive. The receptionist gave me a polite smile. "They'll see you now." I stood, smoothed down the front of my navy blazer, and walked into the conference room like I hadn't cried in my car an hour ago. The room was all glass and angles, the kind of place where someone thought too hard about how important it should feel. Across the long table sat Frey Whitlock, HR director for Norexon Dynamics. Everything about him screamed institutional: silver tie, perfect hair part, and eyes that scan people like spreadsheets. He didn't bother to stand. "Ms. Moraine," he said, glancing at his tablet, "let's get started." I sat. "Thank you for seeing me." Frey tapped the screen a few times, then looked up. "You've had quite the eclectic career." "I like to think of it as adaptive," I said evenly. He raised one brow, unimpressed. "Your resume states you've worked with Durosol Global, Luvian Pharma, and Hyperwave. Those are significant names." "They are," I nodded. "And I was the lead strategist on each campaign. You can verify the results through—" He cut me off. "Your resume seems embellished." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "These are legacy clients," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They don't just hand accounts like that to anyone, especially not to someone with your title at the time." "I wasn't handed anything," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I cold-pitched Luvian at a biomedical expo in Madrid. I spent 6 weeks in a hotel room in Seoul, adjusting Hyperwave's digital funnel to match regional consumer behavior. And Durosol? I rebuilt their failing merger rollout with a campaign that turned their quarterly losses into record profit." Frey stared at me like I was a child recounting a superhero fantasy. "Right," he said, dragging the word out. "You'll understand if I find that difficult to believe." A strange, heavy silence settled between us. I could feel the old anger stirring in my chest, the familiar burn of being told I wasn't enough, despite being the reason so many others had succeeded. "I have testimonials," I said quietly. "Actual letters from C-levels, case studies, metrics." "I'm sure you do," he said, almost kindly. "But people with your background often exaggerate to compensate, and we've had issues in the past." There it was. That polite, corporate-coded insult. I felt my spine stiffen. My fingers twitched toward my folder, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd done this song and dance 74 times already. Frey clasped his hands together. "Thank you for coming in, Indira. We'll be in touch." And just like that, it was over. I stood, already rehearsing the polite exit script in my head. But before I could take a step toward the door, it swung open behind Frey with surprising force. A man entered, older, silver at the temples, carrying the kind of presence that made everyone else in the room feel slightly irrelevant. Frey shot to his feet. "Mr. Varlan, I wasn't expecting—" The man raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes, sharp, calculating, scanned the room, then landed on me, and everything changed. You're the strategist from Eglinton, he said suddenly, pointing at me. Indy, the one who saved the Durosal merger pitch. I froze. Mr. Varlon? He strode forward and gripped my hand in both of his. My God, it's really you. We've been trying to find you for over a year. You're the reason we stayed with Argent after the merger. Your campaign architecture was light years ahead of anyone we'd seen. Frey's mouth was slightly open. You know her? Know her? Varlin turned to him with a scowl. We wouldn't have survived the acquisition chaos without her. Her analytics alone restructured our entire regional strategy. You approved her interview? Yes. That is, I conducted it, Frey stammered. Good. Then move her to final rounds immediately. I want her on the velocity expansion. We've been looking for someone to head the EU initiative. She's the one. Frey nodded, dazed. Varlon turned back to me. I'm glad you're still in the game. We need minds like yours. And just like that, everything reversed. I went from being exaggerated to being indispensable in 60 seconds. The irony? I hadn't said a word about my worth. Someone else did. Someone whose voice carried weight in a room that had tried to push me out. Frey suddenly found his smile again. Well, I suppose we'll be seeing much more of each other, Ms. Moraine. I gave him a smile of my own, cold, precise. I look forward to it. As I left the conference room, the folder in my hand suddenly felt lighter. It was the same folder, same numbers, same strategy maps. But now, finally, someone in that building saw it for what it was. Evidence of a storm. A storm I had built. I never expected a job offer to feel like a threat. It came the next morning, sharp and clinical, like a surgical instrument wrapped in velvet. I was still in my robe, hair tied up in a lopsided bun, when my phone lit up with a call from an unfamiliar number. The kind that usually comes with either bad news or fake promises. I hesitated before answering, my thumb hovering over the screen. But curiosity, or maybe old habit, won out. Ms. Moraine? The voice was bright, professional. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Varlin. He'd like to extend a formal offer. My stomach tightened. Senior Director of Global Strategy, she continued, with an annual base of $270,000, plus quarterly performance bonuses, full relocation coverage, and a private office on the 32nd floor. Benefits include equity incentives and early vesting. I blinked. My mind reached for something to anchor itself to. A memory, a past version of myself who would have screamed with joy. But all I could think about was how quiet my apartment suddenly felt. That's generous, I said slowly. Mr. Varlon wanted you to know, she added. The decision was unanimous. Your record speaks for itself. Unanimous. As if I hadn't been dismissed out of hand just 24 hours earlier. As if the man across the table, Frey Whitlock, with his polite condescension, hadn't tried to fold my entire career into a neat little fiction about exaggeration and ego. One client walking in the room had undone all that, and now, just like that, I was worthy. I appreciate the offer, I told her. I need a little time. Of course, but we'd love to have you start as soon as next week. She hung up, leaving a clean silence in her wake. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time before setting it down. Then I stood, padded over to the mirror above my desk, and took in my reflection. Early 40s. No Botox. No filters. A few faint lines around my eyes. A sharpness to my cheekbones that hadn't been there 5 years ago. This was the face of someone who'd lived every line on her resume. And yet, it was the face so many executives seemed to look past the moment it didn't match their expectations. I had all the proof anyone could need. Charts, testimonials, data visualizations, press quotes. But for some reason, my competence had an expiration date in their eyes. And it felt like I'd just hit the sell-by. I needed air. I met Nancy 2 hours later at our usual cafe. A hole-in-the-wall place with chairs that wobbled and art that looked like it was painted during an earthquake. She was already at our spot by the window, wearing oversized sunglasses and an oversized scarf, sipping something frothy and green that looked like it could fuel a rocket ship or kill a small animal. "Okay," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You got the job." "I got the offer," I corrected, sliding into the booth. "I haven't accepted yet." Nancy's eyes widened over her cup. "Wait, seriously?" "They want me to lead global strategy. Big title, bigger salary." "Well, damn," she said, leaning back. "And you look like someone just told you your cat has a terminal illness." I sighed, tearing the corner off a napkin. It just feels off, like they're not hiring me. They're trying to cover their ass. Nancy nodded slowly. "Because they are." "Thank you for confirming my paranoia." "It's not paranoia if it's true," she said, setting down her cup. "Let me guess. The HR guy who interviewed you, smarmy, dismissive, acted like you photoshopped your resume?" "Exactly. And now he's probably crawling over himself to welcome you to the team." I nodded, lips pressed tight. Nancy leaned forward. "Look, I've been in this game longer than I like to admit. You know what they do with women like us? They recycle our ideas and hire someone younger to refresh the vision." "Exactly. You can walk in with data etched in stone and testimonials from the Pope, and they'll still ask if you fit the culture." She paused. "You've seen it too many times, Indy. You're not imagining it. I keep thinking maybe this time will be different." "But it won't be," she said softly. "Not unless you make it different." I looked away, out the window. People bustled down the sidewalk, lives in motion. I felt suspended, like I was caught between two versions of myself. The one who still wanted validation from the machine, and the one who was finally ready to burn the blueprint. "I'm tired," I admitted. "Tired of convincing rooms full of men in expensive watches that I belong. Tired of being grateful for things I've already earned twice over." Nancy reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Then stop waiting for someone to hand it to you. Build it." It was a list. Names. Dozens of them. Contacts from campaigns I'd led, markets I'd launched, people I'd impressed, saved, elevated. They were still out there, still in power. Still, maybe, willing to listen. "I made a few calls," Nancy said. "Quiet ones. No one needs to know you're planning anything, not yet. But they remember you, Indy. Some of them still talk about your hyperwave campaign like it's a case study." "I don't even have a business name," I said. "You don't need one yet. Just a vision, a fire, something that doesn't ask permission to exist." I stared down at the list. I hadn't realized how many names I'd forgotten, or maybe pushed aside, convinced they'd all turned their backs when things went south. But here they were. Proof that I hadn't just been some replaceable cog. "What if they say no?" I asked. "Then you ask the next one. And the next. And when you find the first yes, you build a door where the wall used to be." I exhaled, the tension in my chest shifting. Not gone, but lighter. Hope, maybe, disguised as risk. Nancy smiled. "You've been someone else's architect for long enough. Time to be your own." And in that moment, something clicked. Not like a light switch, but like a lock tumbling open. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for an offer to validate me. I was holding the match. It started with a question that didn't seem revolutionary at the time. What if we stopped trying to impress the rooms that never saw us? Nancy asked it over lukewarm coffee and a half-eaten croissant, sitting on my floor with her laptop on a box labeled Tax Receipts 2017. Ollie was hunched over a whiteboard we'd salvaged from a startup liquidation, scribbling circles and lines with a dried-out marker that squeaked every third stroke. I was leaning against the wall, a spreadsheet open on my screen, and 1,000 doubts circling my head. We were 3 professionals, one strategist, one branding genius, and one data savant, all with decades of experience between us and nowhere left to go, that didn't involve swallowing our pride or pretending to be 10 years younger than we were. The idea came slow, like most important things do. Not a lightning strike, a slow burn. "We've been fighting for seats at other people's tables," Nancy said, stretching her legs out and cracking her knuckles. "What if we built our own damn table? And served the clients no one wants," I added. Ollie spun his marker around his fingers. "You mean the ones the big dogs overlook because they're not safe or scalable?" I nodded. "Exactly. The messy markets. The multilingual, post-conflict, hard-to-quantify markets. The ones with more complexity than comfort." Nancy grinned. "The third rails." That's how the name was born. Third Rail Strategies. We filed the paperwork that afternoon. An LLC, a domain name, a no-nonsense mission statement. We go where others won't, because we understand what others don't. We opened business accounts, pooled our savings, and signed a lease on a tiny third-floor office above a print shop that still smelled like toner and cinnamon from the bakery next door. The windows were dusty. The flooring was cracked linoleum. The walls were beige in the way only corporate neglect can be. It was perfect. "This is either brilliant," Ollie said, as we moved in 2 battered desks and 1 ergonomic chair that nobody wanted to give up, "or the stupidest thing we've ever done." Nancy handed him a cup of coffee. "It can be both." We each put in what we could. I drained the last of my severance and savings, $35,000. Nancy contributed $28,000 she'd squirreled away after being pushed out of a major agency that started calling her seasoned instead of valuable. Ollie sold half his crypto portfolio and tossed in $15,000 and a Frankenstein of a server setup he built in college, still lovingly named Meryl. "Because," he said with a wink, "she's reliable, multi-talented, and never crashes under pressure." With a combined $78,000, a few laptops, 1 printer that groaned with every job, and enough caffeine to jumpstart a Tesla, we were officially in business. We didn't want traditional clients, the polished ones with pre-approved scripts and fear of anything experimental. We wanted the complicated ones, the overlooked, the dismissed. Our first target? East African Logistics. A contact from one of my past campaigns, Kwame, was leading a startup in Nairobi that was flailing in 5 markets simultaneously. Their platform was efficient, their pricing aggressive, but their expansion strategy was a mess. They had tried to scale using templates from US and European consultants who treated Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda like one interchangeable blob. Kwame had reached out with a simple message: "You always understood nuance. Can you help?" I pitched the idea to Nancy and Ollie, who immediately dove into research. In 3 sleepless days, we built a proposal that made the problem visible in a way no one had done before. Ollie layered behavioral data with geo-fenced cultural patterns. Nancy redesigned the brand's voice in 5 dialects with custom scripts. I restructured the funnel by behavior type, not region, and modeled engagement by holiday cycles and mobile bandwidth availability. We didn't just tweak the strategy, we rebuilt it from the inside. 2 days after we sent the pitch, we got a video call. Kwame sat in front of a plain white wall, smiling so wide it cracked through the screen. "I've never seen anyone treat us like a real market before," he said. "They all copy-pasted Western logic. You actually paid attention." He signed on the spot. And just like that, we had our first client. The office changed overnight. The empty whiteboard was suddenly covered in arrows, terms, timelines, and coffee stains that looked vaguely like countries. We worked from 8 a.m. until well past midnight, fueled by hope and Thai food and the constant exhilarating fear that we were building something that could implode or take off at any second. We hired a freelance translator for Kiswahili voiceover scripts. We brought in a regional consultant for compliance laws. We embedded a chat tool directly into the strategy so local reps could update customers in real time, not through automated English spam, but in their own language, at their own pace. It wasn't a campaign, it was a commitment. And it worked. Within 6 weeks, Third rail strategies helped the startup increase user retention by 40%, reduce customer service costs by 28%, and double their conversion rate in 3 regional markets. They sent us a handwritten thank you note. Actual paper. Kwame wrote, "You treated our complexity like a strength. You made us feel like we mattered." I framed it and hung it on the wall beside our duct-taped calendar. Nancy looked at it one evening and said, "That's our mission statement, right there." By month 2, we had 3 more clients lined up, one in Uruguay, one in Vietnam, and one in Romania. Each had been turned away by major firms. Each told us the same thing. We were told we're too complicated, too niche, too unstable. So? We welcomed them with open arms. We didn't have fancy offices. We didn't have ad budgets or prestige awards or an agency reel with celebrity endorsements. But we had something else. We had the insight that came from listening. We had strategy born from the margins. And we had each other. The kind of professional family forged not by loyalty to a brand, but to a belief. That real strategy isn't about simplifying. It's about honoring the full picture. Even the messy bits. Especially the messy bits. We always thought the big breakthrough would come in a boardroom. Maybe after a 90-minute pitch, or in some glossy corporate tower, where we'd win over skeptics with analytics and charm. But that's not how it happened. Our first real opportunity came not through prestige, but through friendship, trust, and memory. Lin Vu messaged me late on a Thursday night. Her name lit up my screen like a whisper from a former life. I hadn't spoken to her since the Argent fallout, and yet here she was, as if no time had passed. Her message was short. "You still building what we talked about back then?" I replied, "Yes, just with less corporate interference and better coffee." She called me the next morning. Lin had launched a social commerce platform in Southeast Asia. It was small but growing, focused on women-owned businesses, tailors, herbalists, cooks, who ran entire storefronts from group chats and voice memos. She and her co-founder were bootstrapping everything and had hit a plateau. Expansion was slow, engagement was dropping, larger players were circling, and no one, no agency, no firm, was taking them seriously. "They all want a user base of 1 million or more before they'll talk to us," she said. "We're at 40,000, and they're treating us like an experiment." "You're not an experiment," I said. "You're the future of how real economies work." I looped in Nancy and Ollie that afternoon. By evening, we had a plan. What followed was 6 weeks of the most obsessive, invigorating work we'd ever done. We built an entirely new framework for Lin's platform, one that understood informal commerce not as a flaw, but a feature. Nancy rewrote their brand voice across 5 dialects, embedding trust-building phrases specific to regional norms. Ollie created predictive models that didn't just analyze transaction data, but behavior. How women in rural provinces used shared devices, how long they stayed on pages, which colors made them linger. And I rebuilt their market strategy from the inside out. We stopped talking about scale and started talking about depth. Instead of launching into more regions, we doubled down on high-retention areas, offering layered experiences, tutorials, financial guidance, gamified loyalty rewards tailored for word-of-mouth commerce. Lin was skeptical at first, not of the ideas, but of being seen. She wasn't used to a team investing this much in a company that didn't have a press kit or an investor board. "You're treating us like we're real," she said one day. "Because you are," I said. "You just haven't had the right spotlight." We launched the pilot campaign on a Tuesday. By Thursday, user activity had spiked. Within 10 days, the average transaction size had grown by 60%. Micro-influencers started messaging the company, asking how they could collaborate. A few even wrote about the brand on regional blogs, using the exact language Nancy had crafted. On day 15, Lin called again. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "They're talking about us in the same breath as the major platforms now. We're not just holding on anymore, we're growing." She paused, then added, "You gave us a future. The news of our work traveled faster than we expected. Within a month, we had 3 new inquiries: a Romanian energy startup trying to enter Central Asia, a financial literacy NGO in Accra, and a shipping company in Jordan that needed to rebuild trust with regional vendors after a botched automation rollout. Each one came through a personal introduction. Each one had already been told by at least one major firm that their problems were too nuanced, too fragmented, or worse, not worth the effort. We didn't just say yes. We leaned in. We built for complexity. We didn't pitch solutions. We co-designed them with our clients. We spoke 6 time zones a day, woke up at 4 a.m. for regional calls, and filled our whiteboard with ideas in 3 alphabets. Each project was harder than the last, but with every win, the web grew stronger. Clients began recommending us before the contracts were even signed. Soon, it wasn't just the 3 of us anymore. Zora was our first hire. I found her through a policy forum where she'd written a paper on the cultural interpretation of trust in high-risk economies. She was brilliant, meticulous, and intimidatingly quiet until she spoke. And then it was like the whole room refocused. "I heard about your firm from someone in Nairobi," she said in our interview. "They said you ask questions no one else does." We hired her on the spot. Next came Jaden, a half-Vietnamese, half-Danish UX engineer who could code with one hand and sketch user empathy maps with the other. They found us via a Medium post Ollie wrote about failure metrics in overlooked markets. Jaden's portfolio was full of projects for refugee-led startups and co-ops in Eastern Europe. No one had ever called them for agency work before. We did. Then came Amara, a Nigerian storyteller turned campaign strategist with a background in political messaging. She came from activism, not advertising, but her ability to build emotional resonance into messaging made her the backbone of 2 major projects within her first month. By month 6, our team had grown to 9 people. Our office hadn't grown at all. We were tripping over charging cords, holding meetings in the hallway, eating lunch in shifts. The printer broke weekly. The toilet wheezed like it was holding a grudge. But we were alive. Alive in the way that only a new thing can be. Unruly, unshaped, and wildly hopeful. We had something the legacy firms couldn't replicate. Truth, not gloss, not spin, not prestige, just truth. The truth that messy markets are real markets, that the people who live on the peripheries aren't emerging, they're established, just not on your map. That experience doesn't look like a shiny resume, and innovation doesn't always wear sneakers and a hoodie. By the end of quarter 2, we'd closed 9 contracts in 6 countries, doubled our revenue projections, and had to start a waitlist for prospective clients. I still hadn't told Norexan no. The offer sat in my inbox like a ghost from a parallel life, one where I said yes, climbed the ladder, and smiled through the microaggressions while trying to outshine people who'd never see me as more than a tool. But every time I thought about replying, I looked around our little office and remembered, here, I didn't need permission. Here, I didn't have to shrink to fit. Here, I wasn't being tolerated. I was being trusted. We were never supposed to be the ones holding the mic. The invitation came buried in my inbox, wedged between a supplier's invoice and a spam email promising life-changing executive coaching. I almost deleted it. If it hadn't been for the sender name, Global Markets Insight Summit. I might have. I remembered the summit from my Argent days. Polished, elite, insular. A yearly gathering of marketing's so-called thought leaders, all clinking glasses over stale theories and the illusion of innovation. I forwarded it to Nancy and Ollie with the subject line, "For masochists only?" Nancy replied 2 minutes later, "We're going." "Ha," Ollie added. "Let's be the reason someone chokes on their hors d'oeuvres." So we registered, not because we thought we'd be welcomed, but because it was time the room met the people it had tried to forget. The event was held in downtown Chicago, at a sleek, over-designed hotel that smelled like expensive silence and eucalyptus. Massive glass elevators glided up and down the atrium like time machines, and everyone had a lanyard badge with their name printed in soulless Helvetica. We stood out immediately. Our company name, Third Rail Strategies, raised eyebrows. Our attire was sharp, but not corporate. No navy blazers, no stiff smiles. We didn't blend, and we didn't try to. It wasn't just the crowd. It was the sponsor, Argent Marketing Group. Their logo was everywhere. Argent bags, Argent water bottles, Argent-sponsored panels about vision and disruption, words that, coming from them, felt like an inside joke. I caught sight of a few familiar faces. A senior strategist who once took credit for my entire team's work. A VP who asked me in a performance review if I'd considered smiling more. They barely registered my presence. Nancy nudged me during a particularly dull keynote. They still don't know we're a storm. Let's change that, I murmured. Our panel was scheduled for day 3, tucked into the afternoon lineup when most people were either fatigued or checked out. The title, Growth Through Listening, Human-Centered Strategy in Complex Markets. It was meant to be a soft panel. Polite. Palatable. We didn't get the memo. Ollie opened with the Nairobi logistics case, breaking down how traditional growth models fail in markets with irregular digital infrastructure. Nancy followed, showcasing how cultural adaptation in messaging increased retention for our Vietnamese micro-business client by over 60%. Then it was my turn. I didn't use slides. I didn't even stand behind the podium. I walked to the front of the stage and looked at the audience the way you look at someone you once begged to see you. I'm not here to pitch a product, I said. I'm here because, for most of my career, I built billion-dollar strategies behind closed doors, only to be told I was too passionate, too intense, too much. I paused. And yet, it turns out those qualities are exactly what markets need when things get messy. I told them about Third Rail, about complexity as opportunity, about how our best clients came from places others called unscalable. I talked about dignity, local nuance, trust earned in translation, not dictated from a campaign brief. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the applause started. First polite, then louder. Real. We stepped off stage into a blur of handshakes, questions, praise. It was disorienting, electrifying, like watching a dam crack open. And then I saw him. Elias Varlan. He wasn't clapping. He was watching. Same sharp eyes, same measured stance. He hadn't aged. He'd sharpened. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but the moment our eyes met, the weight of everything that had changed since our last meeting hit me like gravity. He approached calmly, hands in his coat pockets. That, he said, was the first honest talk I've heard here in years. I smiled, heartbeat roaring in my ears. Didn't think you'd be here. I almost didn't come, he said, but I had a hunch something important might happen. He glanced at the Argent banner hanging behind us and added, They didn't expect you to be the main event. Then came the bombshell. Elias leaned in and said, almost casually, I've decided to move the full Durosol Q3 and Q4 contracts to your firm. I blinked. Wait, all of it? All of it. We're done with Argent. I'll make it official. Before I could process what that meant, he was walking. Right past me, past the stunned attendees, past the polished event staff in matching suits, straight toward the main stage, where the final sponsor remarks were already underway. Elias climbed the steps, took the mic. The host fumbled to introduce him, but he waved it off. I'll be brief, he said. I just want to say thank you to the team at Third Rail Strategies. What you presented here today, that's what real strategy looks like. He paused. As of this morning, Durosol Global is terminating its marketing contract with Argent. All strategic planning and campaign development for the next 2 quarters will be handled by Third Rail. The room reacted like someone had dropped a live wire. Gasps, murmurs. Phones came out. The Argent execs at the front went rigid. I caught the eye of one, a senior partner I'd worked under for 2 years. He looked like he'd swallowed a nail. Elias continued, his voice calm but commanding. I've worked with both teams. One gives you decks, the other gives you results. It's that simple. And just like that, he handed the mic back and walked off stage, leaving behind a silence louder than applause. We stood in the lobby in stunned disbelief. Nancy laughed first, the kind of laugh that starts in your ribs and spills out like steam from a kettle. Did that really happen? She asked. Ollie stared at his phone. It's already trending on LinkedIn. My hands were shaking, from adrenaline, from relief, from the surreal justice of it all. We didn't plan it. We didn't ask for it. We just told the truth, and someone with power listened. Later that evening, over overpriced hotel wine and room service fries, we sat together on the floor of my suite. I think that was a turning point, Ollie said. Nancy raised her glass. That was a declaration of war. I clinked mine against hers. Then let's make peace obsolete. Because for once, we weren't clawing our way into a room that didn't want us. We were becoming the room itself. The message was short, direct, sent at 2:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. We'd like to discuss a possible acquisition. Please advise your availability. It came from a domain I recognized immediately, achironisgroup.com. Chironis, one of the largest, most aggressively expanding multinationals in the world. Known for its deep pockets, polished PR, and a habit of swallowing smaller firms whole and digesting their culture into silence. I read the message 3 times, then leaned back in my chair. We were finally on their radar, but not as a case study or a client, as prey. Or possibly partners? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew one thing. The fact that they were reaching out meant something had shifted. We weren't just succeeding. We were disrupting. The call was scheduled 2 days later, with Branford Healy, a man whose name alone came with power, Chironis's Global Expansion Director. I'd seen him on panel live streams, always smooth, always rehearsed, like a diplomat negotiating world peace while checking stock prices. The moment he appeared on screen, slick suit, soft lighting, that practiced neutrality, I felt the tension in my shoulders rise. Ms. Moraine, he said, offering a courteous nod. We've been watching Third Rail's rise with great admiration. You've built something rare. We've built something honest, I replied. Branford smiled like I'd proven a thesis. Exactly. The authenticity of your approach, your precision in complex markets. Frankly, it's unlike anything the current landscape offers. That's why Chironis would like to acquire Third Rail Strategies and bring you into our strategic innovation portfolio. There it was. No metaphors, no soft sell. Just a straight-up offer to buy us. I kept my expression even. And in return? You retain leadership, he said smoothly. Your brand, your team. We offer full infrastructure, capital investment, expanded access to enterprise markets, and an equity package for founders. You'd be leading global strategy for our emerging markets division under the Chironis umbrella. It was everything I'd once dreamed of, and everything I had walked away from. After the call, I stared at the blank notepad on my desk for 10 minutes. Then I called Nancy. She answered with, "So how bad is it?" "They want to buy us." A pause. "Do I need to grab wine or a weapon?" "I don't know yet." 20 minutes later, we were in the conference room with Ollie and Amara. I replayed the highlights. Their reactions ranged from cautious curiosity to full-on suspicion. "So, let me get this straight," Amara said, leaning forward. "They want to absorb us, but promise we get to stay us?" "Essentially," I said, "but we all know how that story ends." "Right," Nancy muttered, "with a friendly takeover and a funeral for our values 6 months later." "But," Ollie tapped his pen against his mug, "what if we write the ending ourselves? What if we say yes, but only on terms that protect what we've built?" We all looked at him. He shrugged. "We've spent our whole careers hearing, 'This is how it's done.' Maybe it's time we make our version of a deal." That night, I stayed late in the office and wrote a list. I wasn't going to play defense. If Coronis truly wanted us, not just our numbers, but our mission, they needed to earn that right. By 2:00 a.m., I had it. My non-negotiables: total strategic autonomy. We retain full control over all client engagements, project direction, regional focus, and creative execution. No veto power. No brand alignment reviews. Protected culture clause. Our hiring processes, internal norms, team structure, and language stay intact. We won't become Chironis Light. Our values are not negotiable. The Equity Talent Lab, a new, independent internal division funded by Coronis and led by us, designed to discover, mentor, and elevate underrepresented strategists from overlooked regions and non-traditional backgrounds. Not as a PR stunt, but as a structural commitment. Exit without penalty. If Coronis violates any of the above conditions, Third Rail reserves the right to break the contract with no financial penalty and reclaim our intellectual property. I sent the terms at sunrise, without a second read. They were bold, maybe even absurd by corporate standards. But we weren't playing corporate anymore. We were building something sacred. Branford responded that afternoon with a simple message. Let's discuss. I believe this is a different kind of deal. 2 days later, we were in a formal negotiation. Lawyers, advisors, paper trails, the works. And to my shock, he listened. They didn't accept everything without edits, but they didn't laugh us out of the room either. They negotiated in good faith, something I hadn't seen from a company of their size. Ever. When we finished the 4th draft of the contract, their legal counsel actually paused and said, "This reads more like a manifesto than an M&A agreement." "Yes," I said, "because we're not just selling a business, we're scaling a belief." The announcement went public a week later. Headlines trickled in. Chironis acquires Third Rail, but who's really leading whom? The comments were a mix of awe, confusion, envy. Analysts didn't know whether to label us an acquisition or a revolution. Back at the office, our team cheered when the equity fund for the Talent Lab was confirmed, $4 million over 3 years, with full discretion in how we selected and supported our new cohort. Amara cried. Jaden started sketching a curriculum. Zora volunteered to lead outreach in the Balkans and MENA. And Nancy? She stood next to me on the roof of our building that night, wine in hand, looking out over the city. "You know," she said, "they thought they were buying a company." I nodded. "But they walked into a movement." She clinked her glass against mine. "Here's to never being anyone's asset again." The idea was simple, painfully, embarrassingly simple. What if we stopped pretending that resumes tell the truth about people? I'd spent years watching truly brilliant minds get shut out of rooms they should have been leading because their names didn't sound familiar, or their alma mater wasn't on the preferred institutions list, or they had the audacity to change careers after 30. I'd seen it happen to people I mentored, to women, to immigrants, to anyone who didn't fit the brittle mold of qualified. And yes, I'd seen it happen to myself. So when we created the Equity Talent Lab, I knew we couldn't just run diverse hiring campaigns with glossy banners and multilingual job descriptions. That was lipstick on the same old gate. We had to tear down the whole system and build something human, something honest. We called it Project Signal, because we wanted to separate the signal, actual ability, from the noise of prestige, pedigree, and polish. Zora was the first to say what we were all thinking. We've been measuring potential the way you'd measure a car's worth, by the brand of the gas you fill it with. She and Jaden locked themselves in a makeshift war room for 3 weeks, testing prototypes for a new kind of assessment platform. One that didn't just ask applicants what they'd done, but how they think. Why they choose what they choose. Where they locate clarity in chaos. There were no right answers, only reasoning. Nancy built the context prompts, short, deliberately messy case studies drawn from our real clients. In one, the applicant had to analyze a flawed marketing plan for a fictitious women's health nonprofit in Malaysia. In another, they had to prioritize messaging strategies for a multilingual agricultural platform operating in flood-prone zones. The kicker? They had 48 hours to respond. No Google Doc attachments, no resume uploads, just a video or written response to the prompt and a values questionnaire. We deployed it first in pilot hubs: Dakar, Jakarta, Tbilisi, and Medellin. Our team personally reached out to small community centers, informal coding schools, digital collectives, and even WhatsApp groups where local talent often posted freelance gigs. We told them, you don't need a degree, just your brain, your heart, and a stable connection. They came in droves. The submissions were astonishing. One woman in Georgia submitted her entire proposal as a visual logic map, color-coded and annotated in 3 languages. A Nigerian man in his 50s, who'd worked for years as a regional trader, gave a spoken-word breakdown of a supply chain gap that none of our MBA interns had spotted. From Hanoi, a teenage girl who'd never had a formal job sent a mobile-optimized pitch that integrated TikTok user behavior into grassroots community organizing. One submission from El Salvador ended with, "I've never been asked to solve something that mattered before. Thank you for this chance." Ollie reviewed the first 100 entries and said, "I think we've been screening out genius this entire time." I reviewed another batch and felt tears prickle behind my eyes. It wasn't just the quality, it was the depth, the hunger, the urgency. These weren't people coasting on recommendations and carefully rehearsed talking points. They were people who had fought for every inch of their insight, who had lived the complexities we'd built our company to understand. And when we ran the performance metrics, anonymized, location-blind, filtered only for problem-solving quality, the results shattered everything we thought we knew. Nearly 70% of the top scorers came from non-traditional education backgrounds. Nearly half were women over 40. Many had never been formally employed. We selected the top 50 for live scenario testing, real-time challenges with mock clients, and team collaborations. Nancy called the first group's workshop more strategic than most 10K a day consulting gigs I've witnessed. Amara turned to me mid-session and whispered, "They're not applicants. They're co-conspirators." One participant, a Palestinian refugee with a background in informal teaching, led a team simulation so flawlessly that the mock client tried to schedule a follow-up, not realizing it was a test. Zora stood at the back, blinking rapidly. "We're not just identifying talent," she said. "We're finally seeing it." After 6 weeks, we presented Project Signal's findings to several pilot clients. We framed it gently, expecting skepticism. But something surprising happened. They leaned in. A mid-sized fintech company in Chile asked if they could embed one of our candidates into their product team, without an interview. A medical supply chain startup in East Africa offered a paid 6-month fellowship to a group of Signal applicants. They told us, "We don't want to miss whoever comes next." One global nonprofit wrote a thank you note saying, "You've made us realize we weren't practicing equity. We were performing it." And inside Third Rail, we practiced what we preached. We sunsetted our traditional hiring process, overnight. No more resumes. No more cold filters. Just Project Signal. Our next 5 hires? A former street vendor from Manila. A deaf UX prototyper from Tunisia. A Pakistani single mother who'd taught herself branding while running a neighborhood sewing business. A Russian transgender designer who'd been locked out of agencies back home. And a 42-year-old former mail carrier from Detroit who'd aced the hardest prompt we'd ever written. When the team met them, it didn't feel like onboarding. It felt like a reunion. In a global board meeting with Coronis, I presented our results. Not just as data, but as stories. Faces. Impact. Revenue shifts. Retention gains. And the moral math that finally worked. Layla, the innovation VP, sat back and said, "You haven't built a pipeline. You've detonated the dam." She wasn't wrong. But what she didn't say, what I knew in my bones, was that this wasn't just a recruiting tool. It was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. The invitation arrived on heavyweight paper, cream with deep navy lettering, gold foil accents, my name at the center like a brand stamp. Indira Moraine, founder and chief strategist, Third Rail Strategies. It was an invitation, yes. But more than that, it was a challenge. A summons cloaked in civility. Argent Marketing Group wanted to discuss alignment, to explore synergistic pathways, and, most importantly, to review the potential integration of Project Signal methodology within Argent's global talent division. Translation: they wanted what we had built. They wanted the thing they had once laughed at, ignored, erased. They wanted the very system they would have buried had I never left. The meeting was to be held at their Manhattan Tower, 37th floor, executive wing. The same floor I once stood on as a mid-level strategist, pitch deck in hand, heart in throat, voice always 1 decibel too small for the room. Not this time. I brought nothing but a thin leather folder and steel in my spine. The elevator ride up was smooth and eerily silent, the kind of silence engineered by money. I watched my reflection in the brushed metal, the calm, measured version of me I had sculpted through fire. In the waiting area, I was greeted by an assistant who offered me still or sparkling water. I declined. I didn't want comfort. I wanted clarity. Then came the boardroom, floor-to-ceiling windows, art that looked expensive and unremarkable, 12 chairs filled with the very people who had once dismissed me. At the center, Julian Creed, Argent's CEO. Crisp suit, empty smile, eyes like polished steel. To his left, Michelle, the HR director, who'd once called my ideas premature. To his right, Everett, the chief strategist, who once told me, without blinking, that diversity is a PR lane, not a business lane. I sat down across from them and didn't wait for small talk. Let's be clear, I said. You're not inviting me here to collaborate. You're hemorrhaging credibility, your clients are drifting, and you've finally realized that prestige doesn't shield you from irrelevance. Julian's smile didn't falter. We see value in what you've developed with Project Signal. We'd like to discuss the terms of integrating its methodology into our internal talent assessment system. You don't get to integrate it like a plugin, I replied. This isn't a tool. It's a philosophy, a revolution disguised as a process. Michelle folded her hands. We understand the importance of inclusion. No, I said, sharper than intended. You understand the optics of inclusion. Let's not mistake a quarterly diversity memo for transformation. The room shifted. Tension, prickling and defensive. I opened my folder and laid out a set of documents. Anonymized data, performance reports, case studies, proof. In the last 12 months, Project Signal has screened over 35,000 candidates. 70% came from non-traditional backgrounds. We deployed cohorts across 6 countries. Every single one of them outperformed industry benchmarks for adaptability, retention, and client satisfaction. I flipped the page. Meanwhile, your internal strategy hires for the same period, 42% turnover within 6 months, declining project NPS, and feedback loops that cite lack of cultural fluency as a primary complaint. I leaned back, letting the numbers speak. Michelle looked away. Julian cleared his throat. Impressive, yes. But you must understand, our systems are long established. We can't overhaul everything overnight. Then don't, I said. But don't pretend your structure isn't already crumbling. There was a pause, the kind that swallows entire legacies. Then I spoke the words I'd come here to say. If you want Project Signal, you don't license it, you don't co-brand it, you don't slap your logo on it and dilute it until it dies. Julian arched a brow. Then what do you propose? I acquire you. The room fell dead silent. Specifically, I continued, I acquire Argent's talent division. I take your innovation lab, your development vertical, your hiring systems, and every strategic asset tied to workforce design. I restructure it. I keep the talent worth keeping. I lead it under the Third Rail banner, and I own it. Michelle stared at me like I'd thrown water in her face. You want to buy part of Argent? Why not? I asked. You built your empire on other people's work. I'm simply reclaiming mine. Julian exhaled slowly. That's an aggressive move. No, I said. It's a precise one. Aggression is what your firm did when it buried the innovations women brought to the table. What I'm doing, this is reclamation. He hesitated. I saw it. The war in his head. Between ego and numbers. Between optics and outcome. I stood and gathered my folder. You have until end of quarter to decide. But let me be clear. This isn't a favor. This is your last chance to catch up. As I walked to the door, Julian called out, Indira. I turned, hand on the handle. You're not the same strategist we fired. No, I said, smiling. I'm the one you should have made partner. Back at Third Rail, I stood on the office balcony with Amara, watching the city glow. You really told them you'd buy them? She asked, grinning. I didn't tell them, I said. I invited them to be salvaged. She handed me a glass of wine. And if they say no? I looked out over the skyline, endless and open. Then we build something that makes them irrelevant. The email came at 6:12 a.m. No fanfare, no bold subject line, just 3 words. We accept, Julian. I stared at it for a long time. Even after all the charts and negotiations, the late-night revisions, the cold stares across glossy boardroom tables, I didn't expect them to say yes. Not really. Not to me. The woman they had once considered too bold, too loud, too unwilling to play nice with broken systems. But they had said yes. Not because they had changed, because they had no other choice. The contract was signed 3 days later. Third Rail Strategies would formally absorb Argent's global talent division with full operational independence. Their recruitment framework would be replaced, not phased out, replaced, with Project Signal. I was named Chief of Inclusive Talent Strategy, reporting only to the board. Julian stayed on, of course. His pride required it. But his role became symbolic, a relic kept on the shelf for legacy clients who still needed a familiar face. The real power had shifted. And for once, it hadn't shifted behind closed doors. It had shifted through them. The first meeting with Argent's legacy talent team was tense. Dozens of HR leads, recruiters, and regional coordinators filled the room. Some hostile, some skeptical, a few openly defiant. I understood. They'd spent years being told they were the best at what they did. Now I was here, not as a consultant, but as their new leader, telling them it wasn't good enough. So I didn't open with numbers. I opened with a story. I told them about the first time I was passed over for a job I was more than qualified for, because my resume lacked elite polish. I told them about Lin, the Vietnamese strategist who outperformed Argent's top hire in a pilot program, but wouldn't have passed their screening software. I told them about how, when I finally stopped waiting for someone to see my worth, I built a company that measured worth differently. Then I said, you can fight me, or you can help build a future you can be proud of. And slowly, not all at once, but steadily, the room changed. The reforms began that week. The first step, dissolving the rigid job spec library Argent had clung to for a decade. No more mandatory MBAs for strategy roles. No more minimum 10 years in Tier 1 agency filters. Every open position would now require a signal assessment instead. We retrained recruiters to listen before screening. We overhauled the ATS, applicant tracking system, which had quietly filtered out entire populations. We installed multilingual, mobile-first application portals for global talent without stable broadband access. And we launched the Inclusion Incubator, a program that paired high-potential candidates from underserved communities with seasoned strategists from both Argent and Third Rail. Not mentorship, partnership. They worked side by side on live client cases, not simulations. At first, there was friction. Some recruiters refused to let go of traditional metrics. One director resigned in protest, calling the reforms a feel-good experiment. But clients didn't call it that. Clients called it effective. The first full signal-based hire helped a Latin American e-commerce brand triple its rural engagement in under 6 weeks. Another team, formed entirely through our new model, landed a major transportation account in Lagos, beating out 2 major U.S. firms in the pitch. And internally, something else began to shift. Employees who had once kept their ideas to themselves started speaking up. Mid-level women stopped apologizing before sharing opinions. Candidates who would have never set foot inside Argent were now leading key project deliverables. Julian tried, once, to slow the pace. "We need to be mindful of our legacy clients," he said, his voice diplomatic. I smiled, sharp and sweet. "Our clients aren't loyal to your legacy. They're loyal to outcomes." He never brought it up again. It wasn't all clean victories. There were hard conversations, painful reviews, people who couldn't, or wouldn't, adapt. There were moments I cried in my office after pushing through yet another wall of resistance. But those moments never lasted long, because each time I wondered if it was worth it, another story would land in my inbox. A single father in Jordan who passed our new assessment and joined our UX team. A neurodivergent candidate from Canada who had been rejected 15 times, but now led a product audit in 3 languages. A woman in her 60s, long considered past her prime, who helped land a 12mm rebranding project and smiled, saying, "It's never too late when someone finally sees you." By the end of the quarter, Argent looked almost unrecognizable. And for the first time since its founding, the company earned a global media feature not for its awards, but for its ethics. The headline? From Gatekeeper to Groundbreaker, Inside Argent's Radical Talent Reinvention. It didn't mention me by name until paragraph 6. But that was okay, because the name that mattered most was the one I'd carved out of dismissal, defiance, and grit. Indira Moraine, founder of Third Rail, and the woman who changed the way talent is found. It was subtle at first. A shorter timeline here, a sharper campaign there, a newly onboarded strategist who didn't just deliver on deadline. She redefined what the brief could have been. Then came the first client report. It showed a 22% improvement in turnaround speed. The second? A 40% rise in cross-cultural campaign efficacy. By week 6, customer satisfaction scores hit a 10-year high. And every single project leading those results had one thing in common. They were being spearheaded by the candidates who never would have made it past the old filters. We didn't need to say it aloud. The evidence spoke louder than any TED Talk or LinkedIn post ever could. A copywriter from rural India wrote a multilingual ad series that outperformed the agency's legacy team by 300%. A Senegalese project manager restructured a nonprofit campaign budget so cleanly that the client said, "I didn't know this was even possible." A 60-year-old strategist from Poland brought a tech client back from the brink with a low-cost, high-trust rebranding push based entirely on lived market intuition. Not a single algorithm required. Everywhere I turned, proof bloomed. Not just that our method worked, but that the industry had been wrong for decades. And yet, some still resisted. Especially Michelle, the HR director, who'd once denied me roles with the word "not quite a cultural fit." She sat stiffly at board meetings, arms crossed, trying to frame the success as temporary, a statistical fluke. She clung to her metrics like a life raft in a storm of change. But the truth didn't care if she believed in it. It just kept showing up. 3 months in, the board demanded a full review of the new system. Every department submitted data, and the numbers painted one truth. Where Signal was implemented, performance surged. Where it wasn't, the numbers lagged. Flat, complacent, costly. At the quarterly strategic meeting, Michelle presented her department's performance dashboard. Traditional recruitment regions still floundering, retention down, innovation plateaus. A board member asked, "Can you explain why your hires continue to underperform against Indira's model?" Michelle hesitated. The traditional process emphasizes reliability, credentials. We believed." Another board member cut in, not unkindly. "It appears what you believed no longer reflects the reality of today's market." The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was conclusive. For the first time, Michelle didn't argue. She just nodded, quietly, and sat back. 1 year later, to the day, she knocked on my door. It was late. Most of the team had gone home. The office glowed softly under warm light and quiet hums of cleaning crews. I looked up from my screen, surprised. Michelle stood there, not defensive, not postured, but open. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Of course." She stepped in, closed the door, and sat across from me. "I fought you," she said simply. "For a long time. At first, I thought I was protecting standards, but now I realize I was protecting my ego." I said nothing. Let her speak. I see it now, every day. What we were missing, the people we discarded. How narrow my view of talent really was. Her voice didn't crack, but it got quieter. "I'm not proud of it, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted to say thank you for not backing down, for holding the mirror up." She took a breath, folded her hands. "I've asked the board to reassign me to a department where I can support policy, not gatekeep people. I'm not the one to lead the future, but I can help clear the path for it." I looked at her then, not as an opponent, but as a woman who'd finally stepped off the pedestal and into the crowd, finally seeing the people she had once overlooked. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing," she said. I met her eyes. "You didn't just build a new system. You changed the rules of the game." And then, with quiet dignity, she walked out. That night, I sat at my desk long after the office emptied. I looked at the window's reflection, not of my face, but of the team photos pinned behind me. Our first cohort, our early failures, our improbable wins. I thought of everyone who had been told they were too old, too inexperienced, too unqualified. Everyone who had been told they had to wait their turn. I thought of the women who had mentored me, the ones who burned out before they were ever seen, the ones whose ideas had been repackaged and sold without their names on them. And I thought about a younger version of myself, standing outside Argent's glass doors in the rain, clutching a rejection letter like a lifeline. She had no idea what was coming, but I did. Because we weren't just making space anymore. We were making history.